Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to know the purpose of life and why you're here, then do we have the Brother John Show for you. Today I'll be talking with August Turak, award-winning author, speaker, contributor for Forbes.com and the BBC, founder of the Self Knowledge Symposium Foundation, author of Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, and of one of the most beautiful, meaningful books I've ever read, Brother John. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about a monk, a pilgrim, and the purpose of life. That plus we'll talk about happy accidents, magic and superstition, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes, dirty diapers and Zen koans, Socrates on steroids, and what in the world packing eggs and giving away trays has to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Augie. Are you ready to shine?
I'm ready to rock and roll. Thanks for having me, Michael.
Woohoo! Well, you are ready to rock and roll, as we were talking about before the show, you were even working with MTV when they got started.
Yes, indeed. I was one of the original employees of MTV. I started out in January of 1981.
Yeah.
Before MTV was then launched in August of 81. We weren't even called MTV back then. We were at Warner Amex Satellite Entertainment Company. We also owned Nickelodeon and the Movie Channel. And then we brought out MTV in August of 81. Very cool times.
Must have been pretty wild and crazy back then.
It certainly was. Certainly was.
Speaking of wild and crazy, what possessed you to jump out of a perfectly good airplane?
Well, all my life, I try to tell people, it's natural for people to think that I'm a businessman who happens to be interested in spirituality. But in my own life, I've always thought of myself as a spiritual seeker who happened to find himself in business at different times. So when I had my own business back in the 1990s, we started, a couple of my spiritual friends, we started a spiritual business, which is probably about 1/3 of my book, Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, is telling people how I use Trappist secrets to build my own business. But what I was doing on the side was coaching college students at University of North Carolina, North Carolina State, Duke University, and there was actually a group that met at my house as well. And these Duke students decided for a team building, they were going to go skydiving. And then, of course, come on, you gotta go with this, that type of stuff. So as I said in my book, I was brave enough to jump out of an airplane, but not brave enough to tell these snot-nosed kids that I was too damn old to be jumping out of airplanes. So I jumped out of an airplane in 1996 and smashed my right ankle to smithereens. I compound fractured the tibia and the fibula, which is critical to this whole idea of this Brother John book, because that kicked off a dramatic, and I'm not using that word lightly, dramatic 2-year dark night of the soul for me. I found myself in the hospital. I found myself having extreme panic attacks, coupled with extreme depression, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And it finally hit me like a ton of bricks as I lay in there in the hospital, that it was my own mortality. I was confronting my own mortality. I was telling myself, what are you so upset about? It's a broken ankle. And then it just hit me. One of these days, the doctor is going to come in and say, I'm sorry, Mr. Turak, we can make you comfortable, but that's about all we can do for you. And then what doubled down on my terror was, here I'd been a spiritual seeker since 1971. Mm-hmm. I'd studied with these teachers. I'd done all the meditation. I'd been a good boy. And here I was when I really needed to reach out and grab hold of 20 years of spiritual seeking. There was nothing there. I was embarrassed, humiliated, and horrified to realize that all I cared about was what the darn doctor was going to say. And so that was the beginning of my 2-year dark night of the soul, which led directly to this book, Brother John.
So do you feel, if you look back on your life from that period in your hospital, did you feel you were off track, off purpose, or lost in any way?
Well, when I look back, I would say two things. Number one, it was the greatest thing, the blessing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
Because 2 years later, I had this unbelievable spiritual experience that came out of this dark night of the soul. So it's very obvious to me that all of this was part of my spiritual plan, and it was what was needed to kill my ego. On the other hand, one of the horrifying things that I had to face right before I had my spiritual experience, which actually was very close to the bottom when I was totally in despair, was realizing that I had spent all those years thinking I was looking for God when actually I was running away from him. And that it was one of those situations where you have to go through this profound realization that everything you thought was right was wrong. And it's not a very pleasant thing to go through.
Some key points. I want to go after each one of them. Maybe what we do first is talk about how this revelation started to come about. And I imagine it was a call from a student inviting you to a monastery.
Right. There was. We're talking about. Let's talk about superstition and magic first.
Please do.
Because the first during this 2-year period, all kinds of paranormal things started happening to me, and you would think that they would be reassuring, but actually, although in moments they would be like ecstatic kind of experiences, they were also part of what was breaking me down. But one of the first things that happened was a couple of months after, when I got out of the hospital, the panic went away, but I was still severely depressed. I was going to bed at 7 o'clock in the morning at night and getting up at 7 in the morning, dead tired. So I was going to the gym and I'm working out like crazy, trying to get my mojo back.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I hear this voice, and the voice says, "Not feeling too good, are you, Og?" And I turn around and there's this guy that I'd see at the gym every day. Mm-hmm. I knew that his name was Hugh. I didn't know anything else about him. He looked like he was about 45 years old. He looked like David Crosby before he got fat. He had long hair, kind of a bike, he had a Southern accent, had a mustache, the whole bit. And all I just said, "Hello, hi, how you doing?" That was all we ever. So he says to me, not doing too well. So my first reaction was, "What's it to you?" type of thing. But then I was so exhausted, I just nodded my head. He said, "Yeah," he said, "it feels like your heart's broken, don't it?" And wow, it was like the first time in 6 months somebody had put into words exactly how I felt. And I nodded again. He said, "In AA, we call it the soul hole." He said, "I'm here to tell you that you're in for 2 years of so much hell, you're going to be wishing you was never born. But you're going to come through it, and God's going to be waiting at the other side, and you're going to love yourself a whole heck of a lot more than you do right now." And he turned around, Michael, and he walked away. Yeah. And I continued to go to that gym for several years afterwards. I never saw that man again. And all my spiritual experience happened almost 2 years to the day after meeting him in that gym. So not too long after that, I get a telephone call at my office. Yeah. And it was one of my students from Duke. And he said, "I am just calling to let you know that I've taken your advice. At least one of your students has taken your advice." I said, "What advice?" "I don't remember giving any advice." He said, "You said to do something meaningful with our summer vacation rather than just drink beer." And I said, "Wow, I didn't remember it." But I said, "Oh, yeah, it's cool, Josh. What are you doing?" He says, "I'm spending the summer as a monastic guest at a Trappist monastery in Charleston, South Carolina, right outside Mepkin Abbey." And we talked for a couple of minutes, and there was something profoundly, Michael, about his voice. Something had changed in him from him being there for a couple of months already. And I just suddenly blurted out, "I want to come." And he said, "When?" And I said, "Now." And I realized it was Wednesday, and I'm at work, and I'm a CEO of a company, and I can't go or leave right now. I said, this weekend, Friday." And he said, "Well, let me go ask Brother John." That was the first time I ever heard Brother John's name. Mm-hmm. And he came back about 5 minutes later, and he said, "They said, come on down." They must have loved Josh, because the waiting list to come down to be a visitor retreatant at the monastery is pretty long, especially on the weekends. The fact that they took me right away like that. So I went down for that weekend, was blown away. Some other kind of paranormal things happened to me there. The first weekend I went down. So I came the next weekend and the next weekend. And finally, I applied to become a monastic guest myself. A monastic guest, anybody can go to a Trappist monastery. It's part of the tradition of the Benedictines is hospitality. So all monasteries have a guest house, and you can go and spend the weekend or whatever. But Mepkin Abbey also has this thing called a monastic guest, which means you live with the monks, you get a room right amidst the monks, you wear a robe, special robe for monastic guests, you go to work with them, you basically are a part-time monk. And it's for people that are going to do an extended stay. It's not for a weekend type thing. So I applied to go down over Christmas for 3 weeks over Christmas. And it was while I was there over Christmas that the events that transpired that formed this book, Brother John, took place.
Beautiful. So before we dive into that, since we're talking magic and superstition and events of these sorts, what's a happy accident, and how do you feel you were maybe perhaps guided?
Well, happy accidents are it's kind of like when Jack Nicklaus sunk a 60-foot putt and somebody in the gallery said, "Lucky putt, Jack." And he looked over and he said, "Yeah, but the more I practice, the luckier I get." So I also talk about it, putting yourself in play. If you're living the right kind of life and you put yourself in play, somehow or another, just kinds of things just start to happen that you couldn't have predicted. At the end of my book, Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, I said, I was a really good planner in business. I really enjoyed the process of planning. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed the idea that I could knock one domino over, and 6 months later, the last domino would come over just as I'd laid it out. And I was good. But I said, when it came to my life, I never had a plan. I said, what I had was a mission. I had a mission for my life. And that mission took me all these different places that I ended up going. I said, now that I look back, I see that my whole life went off exactly according to plan. Even dropping out of breaking the ankle and everything was all part of the plan. It was just a plan that was too big for me to see. So happy accidents are the kinds of things that the lucky kinds of things, or the blessings that seem to happen to people that are just that open themselves to grace. I have no other way of putting it. You open yourself to grace.
So thank you. So opening yourself up to grace, you're there at the monastery, and before the Christmas party, we'll get there. Tell us about the eggery.
The eggery. So at that time, they now do mushrooms. Back in those old days, they had 40,000 chickens. And they raised the eggs because, first of all, let's go back. All Trappist monasteries, the Benedictine, they're a part of the Benedictine tradition. They're self-sufficient. So, and they always their motto is "Ora et labora," which means prayer and work. And the Trappists especially are contemplatives, which means meditation or prayer or contemplation is their thing. But they also work. And as I said in my book, prayer is a form of work to them, and work is a form of prayer to them. It's all one thing. And what they had is 40,000 chickens. They would collect the eggs and sell the eggs to the local grocery stores, et cetera. And I used to work every day in the eggery. And so there's these conveyor belts, and the eggs would you put the conveyor belts, you put like 24 eggs in a pallet onto the conveyor belt. They get washed, they get checked for cracks. They go through the other side and they get put into cartons, and then they spit out onto what was called the round table, which is a table that spins around like that. And I would work the round table, and my job was to take those cartons of eggs, some would be smalls, large, extra large, jumbos, and put them in the proper cartons, stack them in cartons as fast. And then when I got 4 cartons high, then I would push them because they're on wheels. I would push them on into the cooler and rush back before they went on the floor. So that was what the eggery was all about, was grading eggs and packing them and getting them into the cooler so they could be sold to local grocery stores.
Beautiful. So I want to double back. This is such a fascinating thing. One of the big themes in my life lately and on the show has been that everything is sacred. Everything is prayer. Everything is ceremony. This is fascinating. Prayer is a form of work. Work is a form of prayer. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, everything that the Trappists do in their work lives is offered to God. It's a sacrifice. It's an offering, and therefore everything ends up being done in like a sacred kind of way. And I noticed that somebody asked. I did an interview just recently, and we were talking about meaning, and they sent me advanced questions, and one of the questions was, well, what do you have to say to people that are stuck in dead-end jobs or that are monotonous or whatever? And I ended up coming back and say, now that they have mushrooms at the monastery, that's what they do. They raise exotic forms of mushrooms, and they sell those to the local restaurants, et cetera. When I go down there, I'm a janitor. They put me to work as a janitor. I clean toilets. I mop floors. I go into the offices. I dust. I do all this kind of stuff. And and there is no more me. And I've built a company. I've built several companies. I've sold them for lots of money.
You had a double company that you had partnered with somebody for Israel that sold for what, $140 million?
It's $150 million eventually. And I can tell you with absolute sincerity that there's no more meaningful job than I have than when I'm swinging a mop at Mepkin Abbey. So it's not the nature of the work necessarily, but I'm not saying that we don't have preferences, that it would be more enjoyable to do something other than something else. But it's the question of whether you can see that you're doing it for the right reasons, and and you're helping the right cause, and you can take something as simple as packing eggs. And use that as a exercise because you have to keep your mind on your job.
Yeah.
You have to. So now you're learning how to some people meditate and they can focus on a candle for an hour as you try to learn how to focus their attention. You can do that while you're packing eggs. The other thing that I noticed about the monastery is you also go to church 8 times a day, and you're chanting psalms and you're hearing prayers and you're doing all this stuff. So you would carry that with you to your work. So I would end up getting in a very, very profound contemplation while I was packing eggs, because something we'd heard in scripture, or something that would sometimes, there's a silly little song actually that you sing almost at noon, almost every day at the noonday prayer. And it just goes, "Blessed are the pure in heart." And there was another hymn that we do. It goes, "Save us, O Lord, carry us back, turn your people around. Rescue your people." So I would get into this whole thing about turning around. What would it mean in my life to turn around, to turn around and see God? So I would find that for an hour or two that I would become fixated on some little thing that I'd heard in a hymn while I was working, and it would become very, very meditative.
Beautiful. So let's go from there. Let's go from mops to umbrellas. And speaking of turning around, somebody who kept turning around in the rain to help others out.
Exactly. Which, by the way, is interesting because I later learned that the word conversion means to turn around. So it comes from the Latin word to turn around. And what happened, I was down at the monastery. I wasn't there on a joyride or out of curiosity. I was very profound, a lot of pain. And so I was down there going through this dark night. And on Christmas Eve is pretty much the same as any other day. You get up at 3:00 in the morning, you go to church at 3:20, and then in between you go to meditation, and then eventually you go to work, and you work a full day as you usually do, and then you have dinner, and then you have 2 more services. Usually you'll go to bed at 8:00. Compline ends at 8. But on Christmas Eve, you stay up for another hour and a half because Christmas Eve Mass starts at 8:00 at night and goes to about 10:30. And then afterwards, the monk have one of their rare little parties. They invite anybody from the neighborhood who's come to Mass that night, and all the monks, and we go to the refectory, which is the dining hall, and you have cookies and cakes and some apple cider and things like that. So I went to the party, and I've had a couple of cookies, and all of a sudden I'm just overwhelmed with fatigue. I've been up since 3 a.m, and it's now 11:00 at night. And I think I just got to get some sleep. I'm dead on my feet and all that. So I head for the door to walk back to my room, and I suddenly realize it's pouring down rain. The rain is just thundering onto the roof, and it's 38 degrees outside. And I've got this surplice from the Monastic Guest habit on. It's going to be soaked. I have to get up for church early in the morning again. They let you rot in bed till 6 a.m. on Christmas, by the way, though. And so I was just thinking, oh no. And I opened the door, and light poured out of the door, and my eyes are adjusting, and I see that there's a cone of light around somebody standing under an umbrella out there in the rain and the cold. And I adjust my eyes. I said, "Brother John, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm here to walk those who have forgotten their umbrellas back to their rooms." And so without another word, he just started walking me all the way back. And finally, when I got back to my room, I end that section of my essay by saying, when I got back to my room, I guess I wasn't as tired as I thought, because I sat at the end of my bed for what I believe was a very long time, thinking what would lead a man who gets one party a year, who's been in the monastery for 45 years, who works harder than anybody. Why wasn't he in there eating cookies? Why would he rather be outside under an umbrella just in case some darn fool like me forgets his umbrella? And that's the genesis of the whole essay, the Brother John. That encounter between me and Brother John out there in the rain.
Now, you became, I think in your words, obsessed with Brother John, or understanding what would drive him to do this.
Exactly. And I said that it's a very, very scary proposition. I said he became not only my greatest, what I always longed for, to be that person like him, but also what I greatest fear. Because what if you devote yourself to becoming like Brother John and you never discover his obvious compensations? You don't get to enlightenment. I'm sure with your show, I can use that word. You don't find the enlightenment. You don't find the conversion or the cosmic consciousness or whatever that allows you to live from a place of love, so that your whole life just becomes this horrible slog of tediousness of trying to help other people, and you never get any compensation for it. And I think that's what's very frightening about him. But it became so obsessive that the next part of my essay is when I go to see Father Christian, my spiritual master or director or guru at the time, and want to talk to him about it and get his advice on it.
You say this line in the book. You say, the truth is, we know what life's purpose is, but are unwilling to face the changes in our lives that a commitment to self-transcendence, to being the best human being we could possibly be, would entail.
Exactly. I mean, I remember speaking of a kind of a paranormal. I had a bunch of college students in Carolina one time, and they were all freshmen and sophomores. It was the very first class that I was teaching, and I said, went around the room and I said, why are you here? Why are you here? And each one of them said curious, and the next one said curious, and I said, uh-oh. But then we got to this kid, and he was about 23 or 24 years old. He wasn't a kid anymore, but he was there. And when it was his turn, he told us the story. And he said that he had been living in a small town in North Carolina. He had not planned to go to college. He had gotten a job at the best business around, which was an ice cream factory. And he had risen up the rank. Now he was head of all maintenance and everything. He said he had the car, he had the girlfriend, he had it made. He was happy as a lark. He said one night he accidentally locked him on a Friday night. He accidentally locked himself in the freezer. And suddenly he's in there in a T-shirt and it's 40 or 60 below zero. Wow. And he said he started screaming and he's pounding on the door. And he said even though he realized that there was no one there and no one could hear him because of the compressor anyway. And he said the only thing that was in my mind, he said, was I'm dying, and I don't know whether there's a God or not. He said, even though he'd been going to church and done all that stuff, he said, when the chips were down, he said, the only thought in his mind is I'm dying. He said, and then suddenly he stumbled into, he found himself out in the hallway. He said, you would think I was head of maintenance, I would have known this, but he said they had just installed a door. And I stumbled in the dark. I stumbled against this emergency door and I fell outside. And he said he was in the hospital for 2 weeks because he had broken every bone in both hands pounding on the door. He said, but when I got out of the hospital, he said, I drove over, I sold my that stupid Camaro. I broke up with my girlfriend. He said, then I walked in and I quit my job. And he said, I bought a van and a tent, and I got a tent, and I went around the country for 2 years, he said. And then when I just praying mostly, he said, and reading and praying and thinking, he said, then when I decided just to go back to college, more or less because I couldn't think of anything else to do. And he said, you know what? He said, I still don't know whether there's a God or not, but I know this, I will spend the rest of my life finding out. And when he finished talking, Michael, everybody in the room went into this deep, meditative, trance-like state, so that I said to the kids, okay, that's after I let them sit like that for 10 minutes, and then I said, all right, that's a wrap. Let's come back next week. Nobody moved. I said, well, that's a wrap. A good meeting. I'll see you guys next week. Nobody moved. It took me 3 times to break the spell, and then they all walked out with 10,000 yard stares. Nobody spoke. Everybody was still in that state that this young man. And I was telling this story at Carolina, some other Carolina students a few years later, and I said, none of those kids came back to the next meeting. Not one. And I said, why do you think that is? And this one girl said, I know why they didn't come back. And I looked at her and she said, if something like that happens to you, you have two ways of taking. You either got to say it was some kind of crazy thing, mass hypnosis, hysteria. She said, or you got to take it seriously that it really happened. And if you take it seriously, then you've got to change your life. Your life has got to change. She said, and those kids didn't want to change their life. He said, so they wrote it off as something they ate or something you said. So yeah, there's to live a spiritual life means, my first Zen teacher used to say it all the time. He said, all you need to do to be on a spiritual path is because you put your spiritual priorities first. And every single time you come to a fork in the road where you say to yourself, which is the most spiritual thing I can do here? Mm-hmm. And then you do that. And if that means you lose friends, if that means you lose jobs, if that means you lose, you're lonely and whatever, you're going against the tide, you still do it. And that's a scary way to live your life.
It is. So you go in, thank you for sharing. You go in to meet with Father Christian. And I've got a few quotes here that are just so profound from him. He says, all philosophical problems are at its heart moral problems. It all comes down to how you intend to live your life. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of my absolutely favorite quotes too. I often say to people, I said, my psychology predicts philosophy. If I know how you're living your life, I'll probably figure out what your philosophy is. And so, yes, we like to be judged spiritually. We want to be judged more on our ideas or our feelings or than our behavior. And to me, it's all about our behavior. In my other book, I talk about becoming, that spirituality is a becoming process. Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do.
Yes.
Excellence is not a choice, it's a habit. You have to behave. You do the right thing constantly. Constantly, you force yourself to do the right thing. And gradually, you become a spiritualist. There's all the difference in the world between a guy like me who plays golf and a guy like Tiger Woods who is a golfer. I play at golf. I am not a golfer. I hang around with a golf pro who used to play on the PGA Tour, and I'll hear him talking to real golfers, and they'll talk, do you know Joe? Yeah, I know Joe. He's a player. He's a player because he is a golfer. So that's, to me, it's all about how you want to behave. And Father Christian gives us a story in my essay about what he really means by that too.
So let's talk about a little bit more about Father Christian and playing life, or being a player of life. And he says, all evil begins with a lie. And the biggest lies are the ones we tell ourselves. We lie to ourselves because we're afraid to take ourselves on.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, we don't want to face the hard contradictions. I had a Zen teacher, and he didn't give us koans like, does a dog have a Buddha nature? What he constantly did is forced us to face cognitive dissonance. You say you're a nice guy, but I saw you kicking that dog. How do you put those two things together? And it's very painful to have somebody who's really good at watching you and seeing all the cognitive dissonance in your life between what you profess to believe. And, I often think of, I call my Zen teacher the great disillusioner. And so I started thinking about that, and I said, why is disillusionment such a horrible word in the English language? I mean, because if you cut it down, it just means disillusion, to lose our illusions. And the reason why nobody's going to come to my disillusionment school, come to my school, I'll help disillusion your kids for you, is because we're terrified that if we ever really disillusioned ourselves of all of our illusions, there'd be nothing left. That we'd have to face the fact that we're maybe not as nice a people as we want to think we are. So the idea of self-knowledge is a very terrifying. We sense deep down inside what Father Christian also says in that essay. He says, deep down inside, we know that there's something twisted. You can call it original sin, you can call it any darn thing you want, but deep down inside, we know there's something twisted. And facing that twistedness in ourselves, facing those uncomfortable truths that we're maybe not the person we think we'd like others people to think we are, that's a very scary prospect.
Thank you. And what is it? You say that ultimately it's fear that's holding us back. Fear of holding us back from what we can become. What exactly is this fear?
Well, it's fundamentally one of the greatest books I ever read in my life is called The Denial of Death. It was a book by Ernest Becker, who won the Pulitzer Prize. And what we're really mostly afraid of is death. I mean, the fundamental, it's our own mortality that's masquerading behind or other fears. So we're really afraid of our own nothingness, that we really don't exist, that we're really not important. It's like you watch a child. What's the first thing a child starts doing is he flips on a light switch and turns to you and says, "I did that." And the reason why he's so excited is the universe is saying, "You exist. You're important. When you flip that switch, I bring light into the world because you did it." And of course, when he flips the light and the light bulb doesn't come on because it's burned out, he starts to cry because that's the universe saying, "You're not important. You don't exist." And this is what we're really afraid of. Is again, we go back to the illusions. That if we tore away all the illusions, maybe there's nothing there. Maybe it's like one of those golf balls where you take it all apart, hoping to find out what's at the center of the golf ball, and there's nothing there. So we're really afraid that we're terrified to find out. I was talking to somebody about it today, and I said one of the reasons why we don't try as hard as we could, and I saw this in my own life. You think you deep down inside, you think, well, if I don't try and I fail, then I can always say the reason why I failed is because I didn't try. I didn't give it 100%.
Yes.
But what if I give it 100% and I still fail? Now what? It's that now what moment that we're so afraid of facing, because now it's not a question of effort. It's a question of that you're somehow inadequate. And so what we do is we play this game of holding back. We hold something back so that we can always say, well, yeah, but if I really wanted that, I could get it because I would really go after it 100%. So we trick ourselves into holding back.
Thank you. And to bring home this point, we come up with, I don't know if I want to use the term excuses, but I'm not sure another way to put it. We come up with reasons that we couldn't do it, reasons that we couldn't afford, reasons that we couldn't step forward into who we possibly could become.
Exactly. I actually address this in the very first paragraph of my book, Brother John. I say, we hide behind relativistic notions that everybody's got their own purpose, and therefore anything that I'm doing is valuable and justified. So this is one of our excuses. So one of the things that I do this as well in my book, Business Secrets, I said, listen, we don't all have a different purpose to life. There's only one purpose. We all share one purpose. And in Brother John, I define that as self-transcendence, as becoming the best human being we can possibly be. And I carried a step further in Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks when I said, another way of saying this is we are here to go from to be transformed from a selfish individual to a selfless individual. Now, we can go deep with the rabbit hole with you, Michael, but what I was really hinting at there, what is the ultimate form of selflessness? It's not just being a tremendous humanitarian and giving of yourself. It's that complete self-emptying that comes with ego death, that comes with enlightenment, or cosmic consciousness, or whatever word you want to use. So we're here to be transformed, every single one of us. Now, some of us are going to do that as doctors, and some are going to do it as lawyers, and some are going to do it as family people, and some of us are going to do it as physicists. So there's a lot of variability at the next level down. But the reason why we're all here is to be transformed. And I get into the hero's journey as being the way in which we are all, whether we know it or not, we're all living the hero's journey.
And we all get to, following along with the hero's journey, step forward into who we could possibly become.
Exactly. And again, what holds us back is the fear. Is the fear to find out that we're afraid we're going to find out that we're not up to the task, that we're not good enough. And what does that ultimately come down to? I mean, even St. John of the Cross said what the ultimate last great hurdle that even the greatest mystic has to face is that you become so aware of your own your own flaws that you fear that even God couldn't save you. So we're terrified in the final analysis that we're unlovable, that even God couldn't find some, this is why we'll go to all kinds of extents to try and lie to ourselves and to other people in order to save ourselves, save the ego from having to confront it.
Is there such a thing? This is such a strange, interesting question. As to be, this is almost a koan. To be first off, I don't believe you could ever be unlovable, no matter what you did or didn't do. But the very act, I'm going to call it of grace, of stepping forward into who you become, that alone is enough.
Well, I think that's another way of putting why we're here. I mean, we're here to become who we really are.
Yes.
I mean, you can look at that either in a positive way. I'm going to get technical here. We can talk about cataphatic mysticism and apophatic mysticism, but cataphatic is the positive way. We're going to step forward. Yeah. The negative, via negativa that St. John would talk. You see in the Bible when St. Paul says Jesus, even though he was God, didn't take on the trappings of God. He came as a servant and emptied himself of his divinity, even to the point of death on the cross. And the Greek word for that self-emptying is kenosis, to completely empty yourself, to become who you really are. T.S. Eliot really gets into this. He quotes from St. John and plays with it in his four quartets. He says, to become who you really are, you must go by a way in which you are not. So you have to also empty yourself of all my old Zen teacher made it real simple. He says, you got to empty yourself of all the BS. And he didn't use the word. He used the word, not the letters. You got to empty yourself of all your BS.
So let's go from empty. I'm going to bring us kind of around and around here. Go from emptying the BS to a few minutes ago, you were talking about Trappist monks, and you were talking about the book about their business acumen. And you said something that actually has to do with this, which is you said Trappist monks don't just make success happen, they let success happen.
Absolutely, and the way you do that, my old Zen teacher again used to talk about, he talked about happy accidents. He talked about running through the raindrops. He talked about holding your head a certain way. All these ways another way I would call it, I used to call it syncopation, if you know anything about music, living your life on the offbeat rather than on the onbeat. Another way of saying it would be to living your life out of the corner of your eye rather than straight on. And in the Trappist situation is they're not in business. They don't care about business. They don't think very much about business. And therefore, they're extremely successful at business because they're letting go of all the kinds of fears and grasping and shortcuts and all the stuff that we all try to do because we're attached, to use the word, the spiritual term, attachment, to be attached. They're detached. People think that detachment means to lack passion or something. No, not at all. In order to play basketball, for example, I have to be detached. Why? Because I have to remember the rules. I have to always have one step behind. I can't just club somebody over the head in order to make a basket. But that doesn't mean that I can't play with all kinds of passion, that I can't play basketball with 150%. But I'm always detached because I'm always remembering those rules. And that's the way the monks take their attitude is towards business. And I actually had a quote in there. I said, the less I've thought about money, the more money I've made. And really, if you think about business, I say what the monks realize is the more successfully we forget our selfish motivations, the more successful we become. I do a lot of work in leadership. I write for leadership for Forbes magazine, and I'm constantly telling people when I get, obviously the people in the audience, they all want to be leaders. Why do they want to be leaders? Because they want to make more money. They want to impress their girlfriend. And I said, listen, that's not the reason why you become a leader. The job of a leader is to make other people successful. Your job as a leader is to completely forget about yourself, forget about your career, forget about getting promoted, and fanatically concentrate on making other people successful. And the paradox is, the better you do that, the faster you get promoted. The same thing with sales. The more a great salesman knows, the more he forgets himself, forgets his product, forgets his commissions, forgets his quota, and fanatically focuses on helping his customers solve his problems. The commissions take care of themselves. He'll make more sales, not less sales. And same with companies. So there's all kinds of ways in which selflessness pays off for us.
Well, this is a big theme in all of your work now, is service and selflessness, and that
Right.
as the path to, I'll put it in quotes, success.
Exactly. That the more, again, it's in our own self-interest to forget our self-interest.
I love it.
It's in our own self-interest to forget our self-interest. And I think, we're talking a lot about my life, and I think what is the best part for me about talking with my life is that I can point and say, listen, for example, we haven't even mentioned the fact that the reason this Brother John thing all came about was my college students came to me and challenged me to enter an essay contest.
Two-year essay contest that you've got 10 days to do this, nonetheless.
Exactly. And they said to me, it was Doug Friedlander. I remember like it was yesterday. Doug Friedlander, come on, Og, you can do this. You can do this. I jumped out of an airplane. Now I can do an essay contest. Yeah. Well, 3,500 words or less, I've got to answer the question, what is the purpose of life? And I had 10 days to do it. I'm up against professional writers, previously published material. I decided to take a crack at it. I'm not getting anywhere. One of my other students, George Bueller, as a matter of fact, says to me, why don't you just write up that story about Brother John? And so, bang, 2 days, took about 2 days to write it, 2 days to proof and edit it. I sent it off. 6 months later, I get a telephone call. You won $100,000. You won the grand prize. And all of this is an accident. This is a happy accident. I never set out to be a writer. I never wanted to be a writer or do anything. And my whole career has taken off as a result of that.
I'm very curious as to what kind of a state. Maybe it's because work is prayer, prayer is work. What kind of a state were you in for that couple of days? Because it's beautiful. It's beyond beautiful. And I want everybody to read Brother John, because it's an amazing essay that is, it couldn't have come, maybe it did come perfectly honed right out of the gate, but it's so crisp and so clean, and it was just there.
Michael, I love you. I mean, you are really putting your finger on something that I've actually pondered a lot about. And I think I mentioned it. I didn't mention it, I don't think. But anyway, after I won that essay contest, I have 6 brothers, younger brothers. My youngest brother, I'm the oldest of 8, and I have a sister that's the youngest. And my number 7 is my brother Chris, and he's a lawyer. And he told me that he was in court with another lawyer, and he told him about me winning this Templeton Prize, and he told him the whole story. And the guy ended up saying, "You mean to tell me your brother never wrote anything in his life?" And then he whips off an essay in 2 days. Goes up against professional writers, and by the way, there were 10,000 essays submitted to the contest from 47 countries. And he wins the $100,000 grand prize. My brother Chris said, "Yeah, that's pretty much it." And he says, "Boy, is your brother lucky." And my brother Chris told this guy, he said, "You don't understand. My brother Augie's been working on that essay for 35 years." And I as soon when he told me that, I burst into tears, and I went back and I started pondering the essay from the same angle that you're talking about, and I realized something tremendously profound for myself. I could not have written that essay in 1996 when all those things happened. It was the spiritual experience that I had in 1998 that enabled me to go into whatever place I went into when I wrote that essay in 2004. And that some of those things I look back that I attribute to that guy, to my friend who had the baby, to even some of the stuff that I talk about in Brother John, I realized something. I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about some of the realizations that I've had in that intervening time between 1996, when Brother John offered me his umbrella, and 2004, when I finally sat down to write the essay. So, and I would say that absolutely, I came out of the experience that I had was a very, very, very profound. It took me a year. 1998 it was actually happened on Easter weekend, which,
Can you share what happened?
Well, what happened is I was really, really got to the bottom. I was just absolutely terrified. And I called up this psychologist that I had worked with briefly back in 1980. Now, this is 1998. And sure enough, the guy, his name is Bill Richards, and he lived in Baltimore. And he's still in the same house, still was practicing. He was a very spiritual guy, which is the reason I started working with him originally. And he invited me to come up and work with him. And so I looked around and I said, when can I get away from work? And I said, well, the week between Palm Sunday and Easter is a slow time. Why don't I'll go up there and work with him during that period? So I went up a day or two before Palm Sunday, checked into a cheap hotel and down the street from where he lives in Baltimore. And as soon as I started going with him, he had this guided. He used Carl Jung's guided imagery kind of therapy stuff. And back in 1980, when he tried it on me, I just got frustrated. I couldn't go anywhere with it. I was blocking. I just basically blocked like crazy. This time I was so opened up, all hell broke loose. I spent a week, and again, there's a whole book there. I mean, it was like being on LSD for a solid week, but it was terrifying, just absolutely terrifying, punctuated by, my dead mother came to visit me. I had demons, I had visions, the whole 9 yards. And I finally got to Good Friday, and I felt somewhat calm, so I picked up the phone. I called my business partners. Thank God they were spiritual guys too. They were putting up with all this stuff on my part. And I said to Eric, Eric, I'm not going to be back Monday as we planned. And he said, well, when are you going to come back? And one of the symptoms of this whole week, I didn't see anybody but the psychotherapist and myself. So he didn't ask a lot of questions, but if he asked a question or if I asked myself a question, the answer came like, thus says the Lord.
Wow.
There was never any screening from the ego anymore. There was just from the deepest part of me, the answer would, or from me or from God, you can take, whatever, the capital S self, whatever, thus says the Lord. So he says to me, when will you be back? And I just heard myself say, I won't be coming back. I'm going to die or be institutionalized. And that was on Good Friday. And so the next thing you know, I'm bawling and terrified and everything. And I hardly slept that night. I was praying this prayer constantly, Lord, I'm not worthy that you could come under my roof. Speak but the word, my soul will be healed. I used to fall asleep saying it, and I'd wake up when it's still on my lips, and I'm convinced I was saying it even in my sleep all night long. Anyway, I woke up on Saturday morning, and I'd had this horrific dream, really twisted, sexually twisted dream, and I thought, oh my God, it was me torturing a young boy for some kind of sexual pleasure. It was just the most horrific dream, and so I just thought, oh my God, now I got to go to see the therapist. He's going to make me guided imagery. I'm going to have to go relive this dream. That's going to be my breaking point. He's going to call 911. And I'm going to go to wherever they send people like me. And, but it was kind of like one of those dreams. I don't know if you ever had one. I've had them where you're standing in line waiting to be executed, but it never occurs to you to run away. You just have to take it. Yeah. And it never occurred to me that I could just not go to the therapy session. So I went to the therapy session. I told him about the dream, and he did exactly, had me lay down and start reliving it. So he said, okay, look at the boy, and he said, what's he doing? I said, he's terrified. And he said, well, why don't you comfort him? And this stuff was more like visions than just imagination. So the boy came over to me, and I picked the boy up, and he put his head on my shoulder and hugged me right away. And then he pulled back and looked me in the eye, and it was me. I had been torturing that little boy for 30 years. And that final shock exploded in my head. And that was when I had my spiritual experience. Matter of fact, Michael, the next thing I really remember, besides the thing, some of the things that happened in my mind, was being, the next morning was Easter, and I'm standing in church with my therapist and his son, who was back in town. And the bells are ringing and the sun is shining, and I felt like I was 10 feet off the ground, and I knew my ordeal was over and everything. So that's my story.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What does grace mean to you?
Grace means to me what I've experienced ever since. I mean, that was 1998. I struggled with depression from adolescence on. I really treated it as like getting a bad cold every once in a while. You just grit your teeth and you just push your way through it. And I have not had a day or a moment of depression since 1998. And each day, I'll tell you what grace is for me. Somebody asked me what are my greatest achievement, and I in an interview recently, and I said, well, about 5 or 6 years ago, I came to the gym like I always do, and there was a guy handing out towels, which is kind of strange because they don't hand out towels; they have a stack of them. You take one. I took one today, as a matter of fact. But this one day, this older man was handing out towels, so I took a towel from him, and just as I took it, he held on to the towel, and he said, if you could be anywhere doing anything, where would you be doing what right now?
Wow.
And I said, I would be right here, right now, doing this. And then I took the towel and I started walking towards, and all of a sudden I realized there were tears in my eyes. And I realized that answer had come from the very, very bottom of my soul, that I was at peace, that I was doing with my life. I had become who I really am, which is what we were talking about earlier, that I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing all the time. That doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. It doesn't mean I don't even have regrets, but even that's part of the perfection.
Yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So before the show, I had mentioned NDEs real briefly, and we both know Raymond Moody, and who we had on the show last week. And you said you got to ask me about this, so I'm asking.
All right. Well, I started out on a spiritual path back when I was 20 years old, and my quest was just to get to the bottom of things. I didn't start with any preconception of what I was going to find. I just desperately needed to get to the bottom of the thing. And one of the things this predates Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and this story predates Raymond Moody by 5 or 6 years. This was 1971, something like that. And I was at a house where I shared with four buddies and going to college at the time. And all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. I opened the door and this guy comes in. His name was Jay Becker, not that it matters. And he's looking for his younger brother, Tommy. And I said, well, Tommy's out with the guys. They're not, but they should be back not too long. I'm here alone. He says, I said, you're welcome to wait. He said, okay, for whatever reasons, we start talking philosophy. He was a very simple guy, obviously a high school educated guy, not learned or anything, but we started talking. And suddenly he gets up and he starts pacing up and door in front of me. I'm sitting on the couch. He's pacing like a lion. And suddenly he stops and he turns and he says, I don't know why, but I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anybody else. I haven't even told this to my wife. And he tells me that he parked cars for a living. He had a concession at a parking lot, and he would have guys get tips. They'd park cars, they'd get tips. They'd give him the tips, and he paid them by the hour. One night, a guy put a gun in his stomach, asked for his money. He said, even though I gave him the money, he pulled the trigger. So the next thing I realized, I'm up on the ceiling of a hospital room, and I'm looking down, and I can hear everything the doctors are saying, et cetera, et cetera. And then a tunnel opened up. He went to the tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, he was told he had to come back. And then he finishes his story, and he's weeping, he's crying, and he sits down in a chair and he's weeping, and he turns to me and he says, now what am I supposed to do with myself? He said, I don't belong here. I don't want to be here. He said, I can't tell anybody. I can't even tell my wife because they think I was crazy. He said, I don't care about anything. And then he said, except for God, except for God. And I never talked to him again after that. But I was absolutely inspired beyond words. Whatever he knew, I saw how much pain it had caused him to know this. But whatever he knew, I had to know too. And but the key thing that I always think back on this is again 5 years before Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came out with her stuff in 76 or 70, whatever, and then Raymond Moody came out with Life After Life. And when I started reading their books, I said, oh my God, this is what Jay Becker told me 5 or 6 years ago. And that's why I made it a point to hunt down Raymond Moody. I actually hunted him down and met him and everything. And I've had a couple of other NDE experiences. And a mentor of mine went in for heart surgery, and he and I used to argue that you could have certainty in life. I said, I want certainty. He said, you can't have certainty. That's what we argued about spiritually. And he went in for heart surgery, and I was not working with him at the time. So next time I came to see him, he said, come on, let's go for a walk. And we went out for a walk, and he told me about having an NDE experience. And I was really blown away by the story. And I said, Lou, what does it mean? What does it mean? He said, I have certainty. There is no death. So it's just wonderful. I've had a number of people. So I've never had an NDE myself, unless, although there were definitely similarities to what happened to me in Baltimore.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Before we begin to really wrap things up, and we'll do a real brief meditation at the end, a completely tangential question I can't help but think about and ask. 40,000 chickens, certainty, and exotic mushrooms. How did they have the certainty? They support their whole monastery through chickens to clear out the chickens and bring in the mushrooms.
Well, I actually wrote about that in my book, and I said, this is I said there's two different ways of looking at the word faith. And one way of looking at it is propositions. Do you believe Mary was a virgin, or you didn't believe Mary was a virgin? And the reason why you believe Mary was a virgin is it's faith. The other thing is, and I read this in a Jewish book on Jewish theology, and he said, for us Jews, he said, faith is a process. It's a way we live our life. We live our life faithfully. Mm-hmm. That if we do the right things, that everything's going to turn out. And I think that's exactly how the monks just, the egg business was, they were getting heat from PETA about chickens. The prices of chicken was a commodity. Eggs are a commodity. It's free. And they couldn't bring themselves to charge a premium price for their eggs. I suggested they should, and Father Stan said, eggs are eggs. They couldn't, I said, we just got to put a blessing in every box. Put that on the carton and then charge them more. So they did some research, and they decided to do, and they struggled. The first 2 or 3 years, they had a lot of failures, a lot of lessons for the way, we should treat our lives, because they had a lot of failures and learning how to grow the mushrooms. And now the mushroom business is booming for them, bringing in far more money at far better margins than the eggs ever would
have. Woohoo! What is the Self Knowledge Symposium?
Well, the Self Knowledge Symposium grew out of the fact that I gave some lectures at North Carolina State University back in the late 80s about my spiritual quest, about the people I'd met and the spiritual teachers I'd had. And the kids really, really responded to it. Several of them came up to me afterwards and said, listen, how could we learn more? And I said, well, if you start a student group and they'll give you a room that you can use. And I said, and then I'll come over once a week and I'll mentor you, And so I wanted, ownership. I wanted them to have ownership. And so they came up with the name Self Knowledge Symposium. And the reason we chose, and I still think it's kind of an awkward name, but what I do like about it is that self-knowledge is critical to every religious tradition. So we were trying to transcend the problem that if you have people from all these, if you can either have one tradition, which we didn't want to do, but if you have even atheists, even atheists can value self-knowledge. Yeah. So we have something in common. We're all after self-knowledge, and it's something we can do that gets us past just discussions, just sitting around and saying, well, I believe in Mary. Well, I don't believe in Mary. I believe in the reincarnation. Well, I don't that doesn't get you anywhere. So how can you actually go to work as a community and do something fruitful together if you have a lot of diversity? And self-knowledge became that unifying principle. So I eventually turned it into a nonprofit corporation. And I have this, I'm funny about this. I don't blame other people, but I've never taken any money for what I consider my spiritual work. I bought my farm with my business money. If I get money for these books, or I get money because I lecture, or for my consulting, or all of it goes into the nonprofit corporation. And what we're really all about is trying to help people find higher purpose and meaning in their lives. That's what Brother John, the purpose of life. And I think there was if we do have a minute, I think that we're dealing with an incredible crisis of meaning and purpose in our lives. I mean, New York Magazine just did an article on the opioid crisis. Mm-hmm. And what struck me was that the guy, Andrew Sullivan, has a beautifully written article. It's called The Poison We Pick. I really recommend that people read it, even just if you just like beautiful writing, because it's beautifully written. But he says in there that this is a spiritual crisis, not a drug problem. It's a spiritual crisis.
Always.
He said, this nation pioneered modern life. Now, epic numbers of Americans are killing themselves with opioids to escape it. To see this epidemic as simply a pharmaceutical or chemically addictive problem is to miss something. The despair that currently makes so many Americans want to fly away. Opioids are just one of the ways Americans are trying to cope with an inhuman new world where everything is flat, where communication is virtual, and where those core elements of human happiness, faith, family, community, seem to elude so many. Until we resolve these deeper social, cultural, and psychological problems, until we discover a new meaning or reimagine our old religion or reinvent a new religion, I'm afraid the poppy will flourish. And Carl Jung, I said this to my students all the time. I said, Carl Jung said, whether God exists or not is a legitimate question. That man needs a God is an incontrovertible fact. We need a higher purpose, that's something that's bigger than us, something that goes beyond self-indulgence. And that's what the Self Knowledge Symposium is now dedicated to helping people to find. And that's what my Brother John book is about, the purpose of life.
So on that note, it is such a beautiful book. It is so incredibly illustrated as well. Where can people go to find your beautiful book, Brother John, and to find out more?
Well, you can go to augustturak.com. That's August like the month, Turak, TURAK.com. And we have several places you can get the book there. There's indications that I'm very excited that Ingram and a lot of these big distributors are putting Brother John on the cover of their catalogs and their Christmas catalogs. So I'm hopeful that a lot of bookstores are going to have it. And then, of course, the old standby, Amazon has the book. The book is coming out on October 21st, so it's just a few days away from being released, but you can get it now on Amazon for pre-release. Beautiful. So you can get. I also want to mention real quickly that the artist, there's 22 oil paintings that illustrate the Brother John book. Glenn Harrington is the artist who did those. Glenn is a multiple award-winning artist who has done illustrations for all the top publishers in New York and done all this cover art. So I'm really, really happy and proud. It's beautiful. As you said, the art is absolutely, as a matter of fact, I mean, it's the art seems to be stealing a little bit of the thunder away from the essay, and I'm fine with that. It's beautiful art and a beautiful look at the way the monks live.
I'm going to say it's a beautiful symbiotic relationship. They both
absolutely
go hand in hand. Few quick wrap-up questions. First off, helping people on their journey, what one homework assignment would you give people to take action on today?
Well, I think the thing I would say is sit down and say to yourself, how do I make my spiritual life my number one priority? I mean, again, and what behaviors, and then make a list of the kinds of, we are what we repeatedly do. Yes. Excellence is not a choice, it's a habit. What are the kinds of little things that you want to build into your life that are going to start moving you in the direction of where your life is built around your spirituality, rather than your spirituality being some kind of subset peripheral thing over here that you get around to when you get around to it kind of thing. I think that would be the most important thing.
Thank you. And then in the book, it's interesting the timing. I always ask a question. Jessica, my wife, she's the producer. She always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids. You talk about a friend of yours in the book who he did not just, well, his wife did not just birth a baby, but the baby birthed a father. And we just found out that we're pregnant. And so I'm going to be birthed into fatherhood as well. What advice would you give to parents to help their kids today?
Well, the most important thing is, I get deeply into this in my book, Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks. I talk about the process of formation. Mm-hmm. That it's a question of the monks are formed. You don't learn to be a monk; you become a monk. You don't learn to be a Marine; you become a Marine. When you go through the boot camp of 12 weeks, it's like you push the first valve down, the music goes round and round, and it comes out here. You become a Marine. You start as a recruit, and you become a Marine. So to me, the biggest thing that we're missing out of is I would like to have a university where I would have classes like Self-Control 101, Telling the Truth 101, Integrity 101, Character 101. Nobody, of course, would come to my university, but that's what we really need to. So parents need to work far more, I believe, on their children's character and not just on whether they're reading and writing and arithmetic. The character kinds of things to make them good human beings, etc. The stuff that I said I wrote an essay for Forbes called "What Every Leader Must Know About Personal Development." And in there, I said the hardest question I get on podcasts all the time, business oriented, is what do you do for personal development? And I said the reason it's a hard question is the implication is that I do personal development so that down the road I can turn it into money. I said that's not the way I look at it at all. Personal development is the most important thing in my life. And the other stuff is the byproduct. The money and everything is the byproduct. So seek first the kingdom of heaven. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and everything else will come onto you. And if you can bring your children to that, I think that's incredibly important. And the other thing is run away like crazy from people who tell you, "Oh, I'm going to wait till my kids grow up and let them pick their own religion." Yeah, it's like I'm going to let my kids grow up and pick their own language. I'm not going to teach them English until they're 18. I mean, come on. Spirituality is core to the human psyche, and your job as a parent is to you wouldn't say I'm not going to teach my kids to say please and thank you. Well, for God's sake, spirituality is absolutely more critical than even that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you too, Augie. Thank you so much. Wrapping things up, and then we'll do a brief meditation. Two last things. First off, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
What person does?
What personally?
I tell you what personally, no question about it, is seeing someone else that I help succeed.
Awesome.
No doubts about that.
And then any last words of wisdom you want to share before we do a meditation?
I would just repeat, it is in your own self-interest to forget your self-interest.
Couldn't put it better. This has been phenomenal, Augie. I have so enjoyed this. I'm leaning forward on every word. It's not just that you share such beautiful stories. It's that you bring them home, you sew that thread and bring them home to such an important message.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I feel the same way about you. You and I are on the same wavelength, especially when you start talking about NDEs before we even went on the air. I said, wow, this is a man after my own heart.
Thank you so much. So do you have time for a very brief meditation then?
Absolutely. And the meditation that I want to use today for us to guide comes from something that's almost, when I first heard it, you almost want to dismiss it as being kind of clichéic or kind of saccharine, but I love it. I was studying theology at St. John's University, and this woman was in charge of giving us a little speech one day. And the speech she gave us, she started with a line from the Bible that I think all of us have heard many times. And she said, "Be still and know that I am God." Then she said, "Be still and know that I am." Be still and know. Be still. Be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Fantastic. Really enjoyed it.
This has been phenomenal. I cannot thank you enough. For everyone out there, got to crank it back up. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get Brother John, and begin discovering what matters most today, and shine bright. Woohoo!
Thanks, Michael.
Awesome, Augie. This was phenomenal.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I thought it was great too. It was fun. You make it easy.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!